Okay. This is my pleasure to be here in New York again. So, and I would like to thank Adalberto because of being very involved in the partnership with Sciences Po and doing a lot to maintain during the time this kind of collaboration with OSC and Sciences Po. And I think it's very useful and interesting not only for our faculty but also for our PhD students, because we can welcome a few PhD students at OSC to do fieldwork or to stay for 1 semester or 1 year. So I think it's important, and it's always a pleasure to welcome Brazilian PhD students there. And I know that we share common research interests, and I think it's important to not only to be only on the national sphere, because as you know, French faculty are very, they like to talk together, but I think it's important to be able to discuss with colleagues from abroad. So thank you very much for the invitation. Okay, so I just want to start to remind that if I'm working on segregation, it's not only because I'm I would like to measure segregation with a lot of tools we can use to measure segregation in terms of index or different kinds of quantitative methods. But because I think it's one step to better understand more qualitative effects, impact of segregation, and in particularly on inequalities, urban inequalities, social relations. And we are trying to do a large research program with EGMO, let's say, yes, to make between quantitative approach and qualitative approach on the impact of segregation. So if I'm saying that point is because, as you know, the main part of sociological research on segregation are very quantitative, with a lot of the influence and the hegemony of US sociological approach on segregation. And just to give you some examples of what does it mean to work on segregation and school inequalities, I'm working on mainly 4 big programs. The first one is about a very important school policy in France, which is the carte scolaire, ou sectorisation scolaire. That means that we have a very specific school catchment area according with the place of residence. So if you want to put a child on a local public school, we have to do that according with the place of residence of parents. So, and it's, you know, it's because it's very important to study at the same time urban segregation in terms of social residential segregation and school segregation, because there is a direct link between residence and school. And also because during the last decade, 12 years, we had some reform on this specific policy of school catchment area. So it was a way to value also the impact of the reform in terms of desegregation or not, and the link with inequalities and school inequalities. The second program is about very specific grandes écoles, but not only grandes écoles. Do you know what's grandes écoles in France? Or yeah, it's a kind of very selective universities with a specific way to have access to the grandes écoles. I don't know concours in English. What's the competition? A strong competition to have access to that grandes écoles. But there are also selective universities, which is less well known compared to the grandes écoles. But for example, Paris Dauphine is one example of a very selective public university with a specific status to have competition and to organize competition, which is not very legal, but there is. And you have more and more new curriculum in many big public universities like Paris 1, Paris 4, Paris 10, with a double curriculum, for example, law and economics, law and history, etc., which is a way to avoid the official fact that we do not have competition to have access to public university. So, but having this specific curriculum, it's a way to produce competition and to compete with grandes écoles. So, just to precise that there is now, it's not only if we refer to la noblesse d'État, just to make a reference to Bourdieu. Now the higher educational system is more complex than 25 years ago, and because it's not only grande porte, petite porte, grandes écoles, and the main large public universities, it's also among public university competition to be attractive for very good students. So just to precise that point. And doing that, I'm very attentive to territorial dimensions. The fact that, and again, it's an impact of the hegemony of Bourdieu's theory on education, that because of the importance of social background and cultural capital, it was very rare to find very deep fieldwork working on spatial dimensions. The fact that, for example, if you think about the place of residence and the location of middle school or high school, it's possible to find other kind of inequalities having an impact on more global school inequalities. And again, I would like to show you that because of Bourdieu, it was very rare to find very very elaborate research on the territorial dimensions. The third one is about the affirmative action program, because of one very famous program at Sciences Po called Convention Éducation Prioritaire, which is a way to recruit pupils from very depressed high schools in the suburbs, mainly in the suburbs and Saint-Denis. And I'm looking at the impact of this program for the general evolution of the population at Sciences Po, and the way that this kind of students are doing well or not after 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, etc. And we are doing comparative research with another university, which is Paris Dauphine, where there is the same kind of affirmative action program called Égalité des chances, very French title. And well, the last one that will be the topic of my presentation it's a new way of trying to think and to be attentive to the interaction between class, gender and space, and doing at this step a quantitative research with the project of doing a set of 4 or 5 very more ethnographic and fieldwork about them. Okay, just to give you a general, global picture of what are the state of the research on school segregation in France. First point, it was the first point of that discussion. It's mainly focused on middle school and high schools. There are only few research on primary school, elementary school, which is quite surprising because I think it's important to look at that level. Of course, in the French educational system, the school catchment area is very efficient for middle school and high school, and less efficient for primary school. But I think that you have to look at residential strategies among upper middle class and middle class, just to start very early on the school curriculum to make the good choice or the right choice to guarantee the good performance on school achievement. The second aspect is a very classic topic in France, is to compare in terms of segregation public schools and private schools, and to measure what's exactly the contribution of private school to produce at the more global level school segregation. And I know that it's not exactly the same situation in Brazil because of the less importance of public sector in education. But in France, when you measure the specific impact of private schools in global school segregation is very important. So it's very well known that in France, private schools are characterized by a high level of segregation. And I will go back to that argument later. The third point is about another kind of difference between measuring school segregation in terms of social background of pupils attending different kinds of schools, but there is another way of measuring school segregation based on the level of school performance of pupils. And it's very interesting because you can find, for example, one school with a low level of school segregation in terms of social background, but with a high level of school segregation in terms of school level. So I don't know if I'm very clear, but you find, for example, if you measure the segregation between schools and between classrooms into the same school, according with the school level of pupils, you can find very high level of segregation. So, for example, in one school, 2 or 3 classrooms with only very, very good pupils, and the rest of classrooms with less performant pupils. So, and you know, very often when, especially in the US, when you speak about school segregation, it's by concerning race and ethnicity and socioeconomic position, but very less often on school level, the capabilities of pupils of doing well at school. And I think it's important to do both. The next point is about the difference between measuring segregation between schools and measuring segregation between classrooms into schools. So, and again, this is, I don't know if it's very important in Brazil, but in France, it makes huge difference with a lot of schools having very huge differences between classrooms. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So. Okay. So the next point is about what's saying about the school catchment area policy and its reform. Another big topic is about the link between school catchment area and real estate sector. Again, it's very, you can see, for example, in Paris, that if you cross one street, you change school catchment area, and the price for housing could increase like 15 or 20% just because you are changing school catchment area for a bad area from a more attractive area. And there are some economists doing very interesting research on the impact, which is in Paris, for example, or in Marseille, in the most important French cities, which is very important. So, and again, you can measure the economic inequalities in being able to choose the right school catchment area. Another topic is about well-being and school atmosphere. So the link between the kind of segregation and the climate or the atmosphere of one specific school. And in particularly in the US, there are a lot of work on explaining the link between the kind of segregation and well-being. The last point, which is very interesting, it's about classmate peers effect, with very strange results, in my opinion. For example, there is a very recent research finding that it's better for school achievement to have the same classmates during a long period of time. So, for example, if there are some experience trying to separate classmates because of thinking that being together for a long time, it's not good to be very attentive and to do well at school. But this research finds exactly the opposite. So that the fact that when you are able to maintain the same group of pupils from a primary school to middle school and to high school, from high school to middle school to high school, it's good for school achievement. So, and for me, I was very surprised by the result, because there are a lot of qualitative research finding that, in particularly for pupils from working class background, being together for a long time create some sort of less school culture orientation than mixing with other kind of pupils. So it was quite counterintuitive to find this result, in my opinion. But okay, so that's yeah. Okay, just a last point, which is very interesting for me, because I don't know what's exactly the situation in Brazil, but I'm very impressed by a radical change in sociology of education. There are more and more economists working on education, and less sociologists working on education. So I don't know if it's an international trend, but it's very strong in France. And I think for two reasons in France. First, economists have priority access to very important database. At INSEE, DEP, which is the statistical office of the Ministry of Public Education, and I think that there is something you can explain that by the fact that it's very comfortable and easy for them to have access to database, which is more complicated. You have to write an official agreement, etc., etc., even though for CNRS or other public universities. And you find more and more economists doing exactly the same kind of work than sociologists, measuring school segregation, school achievement, peer effect, etc., etc. And, I think that could be very interesting to see if it's exactly the same situation in other countries,
In Brazil, there is a lot of economists studying this topic, but I think in part it's our fault, because there is a culture against quantitative sociology inside sociology.
Yeah. I think that there is the same explanation in France.
One thing that helps, because then they don't have this question, so they just go for the data.
It's true.
The data is public, most of the data, anyone can get it.
Yeah, but for example, there is a good example is a so-called APB, which is I don't know in English. It's algorithm to organize the schooling between middle school and high school. And at the end of the high school, there is this algorithm, and it's very difficult. Economists could have access to the algorithm itself, but not sociologists. So I don't know why. So
Sorry, could I add something more?
Yeah.
Because I think there is another problem with something between sociology and education in Brazil. I'm not from sociology, I'm from education, and there are some articles in sociology and education in Brazil that talks about the problem of education in sociology. And if you see, for example, the subject education in the unbox or the sociological unrest, usually something peripheral, not so an area that's really
that's also
central in sociology in Brazil and anthropology in Brazil.
I think there's a lot of good work being done with social science, sociology.
Yes, for sure.
But education is
Not central.
only central. That's more strongly.
Okay, so just to conclude on this introduction, first, there are only few researches focused on the link or the interaction between urban and school segregation. Second, there is the same problem of the ethnic and racial dimensions, which are very, very difficult to elaborate in France for many reasons. And I think it's a very important issue because we know very well that there is in some schools a very high level of racial segregation. I just want to take one example on one high school where I'm doing field work on Seine-Saint-Denis, which is the main working class area on the northeast part of Paris suburbs. And when we look at official data on the nationality, in this high school located in Clichy-sous-Bois, which is the main depressed area perceived as the main depressed area in Seine-Saint-Denis, you find only 20% of pupils in that school having a foreigner background. But if you use more qualitative variables to measure the ethno-racial composition of school, it's more than 80% of pupils having visible because of being Arab or African, or at least not looking at the white French pupil. So, and this is very important because you know very well that there is a strong process of stigmatization and discrimination interweaving social background and immigrant background, but it's quite impossible to measure exactly and to organize field work based on these dimensions. There are some possibilities, but very often it's very complicated and not very well accepted by teachers or head of school, etc., etc. And I'm very disappointed about that because I'm sure that it will be very useful to work more deeply on the interaction in France concerning school achievement, segregation, interweaving social background and racial background. The third point is about gender issue. Again, I was very surprised looking at the literature on segregation in France with Edmond, because of the lack of the impact of segregation concerning boys and girls. So it's quite obvious for sociologists to think that when you have young people living in one very specific neighborhood, and if there is a high level of urban segregation, the impact is the same for boys and girls. And what about school? If you have a very important segregation in terms of social background in one school, what's exactly the impact in terms of school achievement for boys and girls? And in particularly if you connect with gender, social background, and if it's possible, immigrant background. And I was very surprised in France, and again, if you look at the impact of Bourdieu's theory on school inequalities, this issue of the gender issue was not so important. So only at the end, with la domination masculine, but with a very specific approach, the gender dimension was not so crucial for Bourdieu in explaining and analyzing school inequalities. And again, if you are looking at the impact of segregation, both urban segregation and school segregation, gender dimension is very important, of course. Okay, and the last point is the fact that we have to remind that there are a lot of another sociological tradition with one could be case studies, ethnographic fieldwork, organizational approach, political sociology, educational sciences, that are doing different work, not very often focus on segregation, but saying something about the impact of segregation. And I think that, again, we need more PhD theses, for example, trying to make this link or to consolidate this link between more quantitative approach on school and urban segregation and all this sociological tradition, which is very useful to have more interpretation and hypothesis on the impact of segregation. Okay, so I want to just to present, which is the first step of this research, what could be the measure of context effect on school performance when you are trying to interconnect social background and gender. And again, this is a work in progress to think in a more global terms about the impact of social mix on boys and girls. Okay, just to present you what are the three main levels. The first one is context. When I'm talking about context, the first dimension is département, which is very difficult maybe to translate in Brazilian or in English, which is the big district level, the municipality itself, or the arrondissement in Paris downtown, which is a small district in Paris, and we will see on the map later. The context is also the school itself, that means its socio-economic profile, okay, which is place, but and if it's a public or a private university. When I'm talking about school performance, I'm using, which is I think a very good indicator of school achievement in the French educational system, in particular for middle school, which is the two best honors at the final middle school exam, which is called Brevet des Collèges. And there are two very good honors called Mention très bien et bien, which is a kind of synthetic indicator of the school level for one pupil finishing the curriculum at one university. And this is the database from this period of time, 2006-2012, which is 9,000 pupils and more or less 500 middle schools. Okay, just to remind you, if you don't know very well the big Paris metropolitan area, that we are very often talking about the first round, which are the three départements, okay? And this is the well-known part of working class area in Paris with a lot of immigrants, of families from immigrant background. And that is very interesting to compare with the two others. And this is the second round, which is the global urban metropolitan area. Okay, I would like to start with very basic and well-known notions concerning school inequality. Everybody knows very well that school inequalities are linked to all these dimensions. I don't want to repeat again what you learned since the first year of studying sociology. Maybe one remark on these dimensions, because for urban sociologists it's very interesting because it's the only one which is equally distributed in states. And and if you look at all the other variables, not the case, So, and it's the reason why I think it's important is that it is very attentive to that dimension for both urban segregation and school segregation. And again, I think it's not necessary to explain why it's impossible or very difficult to work on ethnicity and race on education in France. Just to start with, again, very descriptive statistics. When you look at the percentage of very out and high honors in the final exam, you see the social differentiation according to socioeconomic background. And you see that 40% of pupils from upper class background succeed at the final exam with the two best honors, which is only 11% for pupils from working class background. Very good. First thing about gender. We know very well, which is true for elementary school, middle school, high school, university, that girls are doing better than boys. And this is, again, we see the difference between public and private schools. This is the socioeconomic profile of middle school. This category is in the high presence of upper middle class and upper class, and going down from working class and disadvantaged middle school. So you see the difference with the best honors. And this is the territorial dimension, making a difference between Paris downtown. Oberti, you remember the previous map, which is one of the wealthy suburbs on the west side of France. And you see that there is a clear decrease when you go from the wealthy area to the working class area, which is the case of Saint-Denis, with only 16% of pupils succeeding with the best honors at the final middle school exam. And I would like to, say that it's quite easy to have mention très bien et bien at the final middle school exam. So it's not a very competitive okay. So just to give a territorial or spatial picture of the distribution of public schools. These two types, Sud and Sud Moyen, are the two most privileged types of schools. This is only for public schools. And you see that there is a high concentration in Paris downtown, which is here, and the west side. And when you look at the second type of upper class middle school, there is a clear distribution on the west side again. And this is the opposite of a very depressed and working class middle school with a high presence of immigrants. And you see that there is a high concentration in Saint-Denis and on the east part of Paris suburb. So just to keep in mind this spatial distribution of schools. Okay, I want to take more time to explain this map, which I think it's a very useful map in terms of sociological approach of urban and school segregation. There are at least three analytical levels. These are the boundaries of one municipality, and this is the boundaries for arrondissement and territory. The red areas are in average at the municipal level or at the arrondissement level, the success with the best honors, which is a very low rate of success with the best honors. It's about 5 and 8% of pupils succeeding with the two best honors, and going up from red areas to blue areas, the high level of succeeding with the two best honors with pupils with schools with about 60% of pupils succeeding with the two best honors. So here on the top, red and brown area, it's between 5 and 15%, 40-60% succeeding with the two best honors. And you see, on average, the spatial, the urban reflection or manifestation of this inequality. Okay? And this is the first level. And if you connect this first level with the second one, triangle are working class. In each one triangle is one school, but one working class with a very working class socioeconomic profile. One cycle is with a more important presence of lower middle class and working people, and the square are very school with a significant presence of upper middle class and upper class. Okay, so this is two different kinds of schools. And which is important is to see the location of one school, if it's a triangle, a circle, a square, according with its own characteristic in terms of school performance and socioeconomic profile, and in average the local space where the school is located. I don't know if I'm very clear. Okay. And okay, so first remark: no one red square is only two red cycles. That means that this is for public middle school, not private middle school. There is a strong link between socioeconomic profile and school achievement, which is not very surprising. But you know, there is no one red square, so it's clear that when in Paris public middle school, when there is a high presence of lower upper class or upper class, it means that you are a high level of success with the best honor. Okay, there is no one school. Okay, but there is only, and I would like to go back to this, which is very important, only 4 dark blue triangles, 3 of them in Paris. That means that you have very disadvantaged middle school in terms of socioeconomic profile, doing very, very well in terms of school achievement. As well as the best, as the most privileged public middle school. So these 4 schools, and I will go back to that specific school, are very interesting because they are very disadvantaged in terms of socioeconomic profile, but doing very, very well in terms of school achievement. Third remark: you see the strong homogeneity of Seine-Saint-Denis, which is the working class area in the north part of Paris suburb. No, all of these are all municipalities. There is only Oberti, which is the quite more wealthy municipality in Seine-Saint-Denis, that you see that here it's very homogeneous. So very depressed school, disadvantaged school in terms of socioeconomic profile, doing quite bad in terms of school achievement. Why it's important? Because the school policy reform in terms of school section area was to give the possibility of working class families to go to another school catchment area. But you understand, just looking at this map, that what does it mean for people there to go not here in one local school, but in another area which is exactly the same. So, which is quite different if you think about Oberti, Val-de-Marne or Paris, because it makes sense for family to use this possibility of avoiding the local school to have access to a better school in terms of school achievement and socioeconomic profile, for example. But you know that there is a kind of, I don't know in English, fixation faciale, yeah, social, you know, that it's more difficult for people living there to use the possibility of choosing another school catchment area that is another middle school. Yeah. Yeah. No, this is a very good point. Thank you. Yeah, this is a very good point, and because it's part of the qualitative research we did with Clément, and this is another huge difference between Palestras and Oberti, for example. It was doing qualitative interviews with parents just after 6 months before the reform and 1 year after the reform, and it was very clear that it was very the families living there have more clear knowledge of very differences between schools in terms of school achievement, socio-economic composition, etc. Here, it was less true because of very families with a very working class background, majority of them from immigrant background, with less knowledge of qualitative differences between curriculum, options, etc., which is a way to make a different choice in terms of schooling. So this is again one very unequal aspect of school dynamics in terms of. Okay, another point is to see that here in the northeast part of France, there's no one blue square, which is quite strange because it's now there is a significant process of gentrification in this part of town. But because of huge competition among Parisian families with a high level of football capital, there is school flights in some way, like the white flight in the US suburbs, from this side to this side. And this is the illustration of this process of many lower upper class and upper class families living there, deciding to put children here in the central part or southwest part of France. And this is one expression which is interesting to understand that even though living in Paris downtown, you find lower middle class families avoiding the local school to go in another arrondissement, considering better in many ways in terms of socio-economic composition, etc. Okay, but again, this is very interesting because you see that when you look at a very limited urban space, very limited space, you find, for example, here 3 triangles, that means 3 working class public middle schools, one doing very well, very bad, which is interesting because all of these 3 middle schools are located in a blue area, which is considered as doing well, but they are characterized by the working class profile in terms of composition, one doing very well and other doing bad. Same thing here and here. So, and we decided to start qualitative research to know something more about this specific local context. Why is it possible to find this situation? And for example, here, the working class middle school is doing better than the middle class public school, which is quite surprising. And you have to understand if there is a specific program because of the local history of one school, because of one team with specific innovative educational initiative, events, I don't know what, so you have to, and it's what you are doing that. Okay. When you look now at private school, you see that, which is, again, quite surprising, much more widespread compared to public school. That means that there are privileged schools doing bad in terms of school achievement. Yeah, because they are red. And this is one, and you see that they are located between Paris and France, some etc. But also on the older trend. This is the expression of one part of private schools recruiting pupils from privileged background, but with huge difficulty at school. So it's the clear example. I don't know if you have this kind of private school in Brazil, which are for privileged pupils, but doing bad at school. Yeah. So there are very bad words in French to speak about this private school. You know, it's for fils de riches, mais ils ne peuvent pas continuer la vraie compétition dans le public avec les autres élèves. Okay. So, and you know, this is very interesting because you don't find widespread from public schools, only from private schools, which is very interesting because of the perception of private school. Okay, again, there is a strong concentration in Paris downtown. There is few triangles, no one blue. So that means that, again, it's very interesting to show that you find some disadvantaged public school doing very well in terms of school achievement, which is not the case for private schools. So it's very interesting because there is the public debate in France trying to explain that public schools are not doing well for disadvantaged pupils, but it's not the case for private schools too, so it's very difficult to. Yeah. Yeah, but yeah. Yeah, but they have to pay. So the complexity of the French educational system is that when you talk about private schools, you have to understand that 90% of financial resources are public. Okay, so this is the contradiction of the French educational system, that the huge majority of private schools are supported by state. Okay? But they could be Catholic or other religion, but the fact that they are not real private schools because the financial resources are from the state. Yeah, with more autonomy and etc. etc. So this is the okay.
More like chartered
in some way, yeah. No, they are not vouchers. So you have to decide, and there are two separate curriculum. And now it's very difficult, for example, when you decide to change from public to private school, and then to go back at the end of middle school to a public high school, it's more and more difficult. So it's why it's an important choice for parents to decide when to change, why, and what does it mean for the long term in terms of curriculum. Okay, this is just to make a connection between school segregation, having also data on school achievement, and socio-economic segregation, which is the Edmond Prefect typology. And it's not necessary to speak a lot. You see that you can what's the name? Yeah, you can match the two maps and see that blue, red, mixed. So, and again, it's not very surprising because of what I said before about school catchment area policy. So the fact that it's quite logic to find the same representation. But at the same time, this is a very important result of our own research with Edmond. When you measure the dissimilarity index concerning social residential segregation between lower upper class and working class people, it's about 0.5. Okay, that means that half of one group have to move to find an equal distribution of the two groups in the global metropolitan area. Okay, and when you switch from social residential position to school segregation, it increased from 0.5 to 0.7. That means that when you compare segregation between upper class and working people on residential space and school, it's much higher at school. That means that 70% of pupils with upper class background have to change school to find an equal distribution in all public schools, which is quite high. Okay? Yeah. So again, it's interesting because very often when you have more global presentation of the French educational system, very often I'm very surprised at the fact that foreigners, for example, think that the French educational system is very equal. No. In terms of school achievement or in terms of school segregation, it's not a very equal system. Yeah, just and I think that if you compare with other European countries, you can find a situation with less segregation and more equal results in terms of school achievement. Okay. Okay. Now, this is the second part of the presentation. So to go ahead, we try to interconnect social background, gender, with 4 other dimensions. The first one is to think about the interweaving between social background, gender, and school status in terms of public or private. Second, in terms of place, Paris versus working class suburbs. Third, in terms of gender and school social profile, and then to look only for disadvantaged middle school. To see exactly what's going on when you are focusing only on disadvantaged middle school. Okay. This is, again, a very well-known result. So there is the first one is that girls are doing better than boys. Okay. But when you compare, according with school status, boys from working class background are taking benefit of being schooling in private school. With double of succeeding with the best honors. And the last point, which is very important, is it's that it doesn't make difference for pupils with upper middle class background according with school status. So there is no difference for these pupils according with school status, which is again very interesting because families with upper middle class background are very often more focusing on private school. But it doesn't make difference when you measure the school achievement between private and public school. That makes difference for this specific category. Boys, and not very often girls, but boys from working class background. Okay, when you use the same kind of measure, comparing Paris and working class suburbs, controlled by social background, etc., varies a variation based on pace for both girls and boys. And Paris public schools located in Paris are always doing better than schools located elsewhere in the suburbs. And this is very interesting because families from upper middle class background are taking more benefit from attending the middle school in Paris than the working class. So this is quite new result compared to the classic results on school achievement, and I think that there are some implications in terms of public policy. Okay, this is another very important result because I don't know what's the debate in Brazil about social mix. But in France, there are two different positions. One is let me say, called the classic Republican position. That means that social needs is good for everybody, both for in terms of urban segregation and school segregation. But there is another position which is very strong and very often published in academic reviews, showing that social mix is not very good for school achievement, for example. But using this data, you find that there is a clear advantage for boys from disadvantaged backgrounds to attend a mixed or a privileged school rather than a disadvantaged school. And it is very clear. So this is one empirical result showing that when you compare the same kind of groups of both from working class background, attending very homogeneous working class school or more mixed or privileged public school, it makes a difference, a clear difference in terms of school achievement. So that means that if you think that proposing social mix policies is one way of struggling school inequality, there is this result. Okay. This is the last slide about the interaction between social background, gender, and place only in the advantage public industry. And I don't want to detail all the elements, but I think that the most surprising result was to find that attending a disadvantaged middle school in a wealthy area is very negative for school achievement. So, and it's very difficult for me to explain that in English, but I will try to do it. So, because it's very qualitative and very complex mechanism to explain that counterintuitive result. The fact that, for example, in Seine-Saint-Denis, the regular situation is to attend a working class, the local public school. And there is no huge difference in terms of socio-economic composition or school achievement if you are attending a school in that neighborhood, in La Courneuve, Clichy, Bondy, etc. Because, the difference are very limited in terms of socio-economic composition and school achievement. So that means that, for example, the process of stigmatization is not so strong at the very large urban level scale, okay? But the same situation in Val-de-Marne, Hauts-de-Seine, or in some parts of Paris-Downtown, it's completely different because there are only few working class public middle schools which are very stigmatized because they are surrounded by wealthy or more privileged middle school, and the fact that you are in that only in that school means that you are very déclassé, very okay. So and this, again, this is very interesting because when you so the implication is to say in a very simple terms that for a boy from working class background attending a disadvantaged school is a better situation in Seine-Saint-Denis than in other parts. I don't know if I'm clear. Which it's quite surprising for many people to hear this kind of thing. So it means that when you are in Hauts-de-Seine, which is the west side of Paris suburbs, there are only few disadvantaged public schools, but they are very, very stigmatized. That means that being there, it's a very bad situation for school achievement, whatever the social economic background. In Seine-Saint-Denis, paradoxalement, the global situation is more homogeneous, and in average, the school position is the same in all the municipalities, and this is why you can find the result. And I would like to. Yeah, sure. I'm skipping all this table just to. Okay, and I'm going back. Okay. So, and we'll explain this paradoxical result. First, girls and boys are not equally sensitive to the context in terms of sector, of place, and of school social profile. There is a complex interaction between all these dimensions. There are three important results. There is a benefit of attending private schools for boys from working class background. Okay? It's less true for girls. I would like to highlight this point, but it's more evident for boys from working class background and less evident for girls. Second point, which is linked to the social mixed policy, there is a benefit of attending a mixed or a more advanced school than a disadvantaged school. And in particularly for boys, again, boys with disadvantaged background. And last result, which is a challenge to understand why, attending a disadvantaged school in Paris is a benefit compared to the same kind of school in the periphery. Okay. So, sorry? Yeah, and I'm trying to get this one. So the question is why Paris working class middle school are doing better than the same kind of school in the suburbs. Why? They are the same socio-economic profile. You can make four hypotheses. One, there is a clear difference between working class middle school in Paris and the same kind of school in the suburbs, according with the teacher and staff members, because they are more experienced, they are more professional, more qualified. I don't know. We have to go deeper using other database to understand if, looking at this specific dimension, there are or not differences between Paris disadvantaged middle school and the other. the second point, which is very interesting, because as you know, we are using very global socioeconomic categories, which is the first level of INSEE publication of socioeconomic categories, socio-professionnel, socioeconomic position. And I'm not so sure that that level of elaboration is the right one to think about more qualitative differences according to socioeconomic background. And it's because I'm starting this work to use the second level of publication of the nomenclature, how do you say it? Classification, socioeconomic classification, which is a better one. And there is another good work done by Rocher and Rocher in 2015, using a new database to characterize in a very qualitative dimensions the socio-economic background. For example, if there are books at home, if the parents propose to do at least one time a month to go in a museum, etc. So just to have more cultural and qualitative variables to qualify correctly the family background, and not only the socio-economic position in terms of INSEE, of the Statistical National Office, you know, and in order maybe to show that working people living in Clichy-sous-Bois, Bondy, or other municipalities in the very depressed suburbs are not exactly the same than working class people, sometimes from immigrant background, living in the 18e, 19e, 20e arrondissement. So, and, you know, I think that this is interesting because at the same time, I think that using classic statistical categories and approach, you find some quite interesting results. But at the same time, we see very well that it's not sufficient. So it's clearly a strong limit of my work, what I am presenting here. And you have to be aware about what you are doing and saying about school inequality, school segregation, and the limit of, you know, using these categories, socioeconomic categories, and the classic, regular classification of socioeconomic positions. Yeah. And we need more variables on culture and social practices, etc., or, you know, also the construction, and etc. But it's very difficult to combine different databases using the same geographical reference, etc. But it's sure that there is, The third hypothesis is about the difference in terms of specific local programs and educational policies. As you know, it's possible at the municipal level in France to elaborate some specific programs. And maybe there are significant differences between Paris and working class municipalities in implementing innovative educational programs, after-school activities, etc. And at the end, maybe it makes a difference in terms of school achievement between the same kind of public school in Paris and in Brussels. And the last point is, of course, about urban segregation. So what does it mean for a teenager living in Paris downtown, in a working class area, in 19e, 20e arrondissement, compared to the same kind of teenager living in a public housing project in Clichy-sous-Bois, Bondy, Saint-Denis. Well, it's difficult to measure and to value exactly what some kind of a neighborhood effect or local context effect in terms of urban environment. But again, there are some ethnographic works showing that it's not the same thing, living with the same socioeconomic conditions, living in Paris downtown and living in Saint-Denis or in other working class municipalities. And in terms of methodology, it's challenging to find the right way of, connecting together quantitative approach like this one and more qualitative figures to find and to propose a good explanation. Okay, this is the last point about the strange situation, the fact that attending the elementary school in a wealthy suburb, pupils attending the elementary school in wealthy suburbs are doing worse than those attending the same type of school in working class suburbs. And this is the true explanation I was presenting. And to verify this hypothesis, I'm trying to do an incredible work, very so I would like to explain what I'm trying to do. So you have the possibility of create an approximation of one school catchment areas, trying to elaborate the exact socioeconomic composition with the national census. Okay, so and it's a method with a spatial combination to propose what could be the theoretical socioeconomic profile of one school according to its own school catchment area. Okay? And what exactly the real socioeconomic composition of that school. Okay? You understand? Okay. So maybe if I can use the table. So for example, U for neighborhood is one school catchment area. Okay? So using the data from the national census, I can, this is called IESP in French, this is the smallest unit for the census, and creating an approximation of the school catchment area, I can elaborate the theoretical socioeconomic profile of one school catchment area. For example, and for example, the class, living in the class, and working class. I'm saying that if there is a clear correspondence between one school and its own school catchment area, that means that there is no people avoiding the local school, or at least there is not a gap between the theoretical profile and the real one. Okay? But there is. This is, for example, in red, only working class municipalities, green, middle class municipalities, and blue, privileged municipalities. And you see, for example, this is a good example, in four public schools, this one, the theoretical percentage of working class pupils will be 25. The real one is more than 60. But that means that, and this is a middle school located in wealthy suburbs. Yeah, but there, it was a very methodological debate in France. You know, colleagues criticizing my work, saying that you have to prove what you are showing, and so we are trying to do that with a very empirical and statistical method. And it's clear that you find that it's incredible. So the gap between the theoretical profile and the real one in one specific middle school. And the fact that in this working class middle school, located in wealthy suburbs or surrounded by wealthy suburbs and wealthy middle school, the process of reinforcing socioeconomic segregation in that kind of school is very strong. Okay, so just to finish and to conclude, I would like, it's quite new for me to try to make a connection between sociological academic research and proposal in terms of political issues. But I'm participating in an official commission for the Ministry of Education in France, and I'm trying to evaluate some public policies in Seine-Saint-Denis linked to the school policy reform I was talking about. And thinking about the results I was presented, we can propose some ways or some trajectories of some public policies, and some of them very provocative, in particular in the French context. First one is just to think about delocalization or decentralization of Paris attractive middle schools in the suburbs. So you know very well that it could be possible to propose more attractive public schools in urban space than Paris downtown. But it's not the priority of the present government, and I think it will not be the same. It will be the same thing for the next government next year. Second proposal, very provocative in the French debate. If private schools are supported by public financial resources, why they do not respect the school catchment area policy? This is the paradoxical situation in France, that when we talk about private schools, it means private in terms of internal organization, but depending on public resources. And it's incredible because the public ministry is thinking again about how is it possible to produce more social needs, but at the same time they continue to support private schools which are not concerning by school catchment area. It's completely crazy and inefficient. Yeah. The third proposal just could be, which is completely provocative. I remember 6 months ago presentation of the Senate in front of French deputies, and proposing that, okay, if it's better for boys from working class background to attend private school, why do you not think about supporting the implementation of private school in very disadvantaged urban areas? First proposal, which is a very US one, implemented in Florida, for example, in Miami, which to propose vouchers for disadvantaged families to help or to support the possibility of attending private schools, with the possibility of the verification of using real vouchers to do that. But it could be one possibility. Yeah, just to. If you remember the first map about the strong homogeneity of Seine-Saint-Denis, it's clear that if you want to disembed people from very disadvantaged areas, you have to think about mobility. And if you think about more mobility in a large metropolitan space, you have to help by financial support or other using other tools to support the mobility, and nothing was proposed with the previous policy reform. Of course, this is a classic one, to do much more resources for very disadvantaged schools. And again, it was 2-3 years ago, a very interesting work done by an economist showing that if you look at the so-called zone d'éducation prioritaire in France, which formally are schools with more resources compared to more advantaged public schools. But when you put into the measure the cost of the teacher, for example, you see that the difference between schools concerned by zone d'éducation prioritaire and more advantaged schools is very low. Because in more advantaged schools, you find teachers with more experience and that we have to pay more. And so in terms of global budget, the difference is very, very low. So it's not really an affirmative action program. If you think about a strong difference between resources according with the socio-economic profile of the school. And I would like to finish on that. So this is the commission that we're talking about, and we are trying to propose a new way of organizing the school catchment area. So now the classic, the regular situation is to have one school for one school catchment area. The proposal is to have a more large school catchment area with a list of 2 or 3 middle schools, and with, again, I don't know in English, algorithm, coming to down to that if you are in the school A, B, C, you will find exactly the same socio-economic composition, and using the algorithm to do that according with the profile of the school catchment area. So, trying to have larger school catchment area, propose an average socio-economic profile, and to secure the parameter that it doesn't make a difference if you are in A, B, C, because you will find the same kind of school in terms of socio-economic composition. Okay, so and it's a combination of these two dimensions. Okay, thank you.